Good morning, and on behalf of the University of Pikeville and the Coleman College of Business, I want to welcome you to a wonderful presentation this morning. We have a dynamic speaker who will motivate and inspire us to do great things in this community and in this region. As you know, our economy has changed and is changing drastically, and in our efforts to help influence our local economy, we at the University of Pikeville and the College of Business are looking for opportunities to create startup ventures and entrepreneurial activities. And this morning, we have our first speaker of this semester, Jack Miner. Jack is the director for the Venture Center at the University of Michigan, where he directs programs as a mentor in residence, the business formation team, and the venture accelerator. The goal of the Venture Center is to help startup ventures to move quickly to the marketplace. He's a startup specialist and during 2013 launched 6 startup companies and has managed a portfolio of more than 20 startup projects. Jack has extensive experience in the technology field. At the University of Michigan, he works with technology and intellectual properties. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in management from Northwestern University's Kellogg Graduate School of Management. So please join me in welcoming Jack Miner.
Thank you all very much, I felt very welcome since I've been here, so it's great to be here. The goal of the presentation really is to kind of share my personal experiences around entrepreneurism, startups, and economic development. This presentation is going to be more focused on entrepreneurship and startups, and then later this afternoon we'll talk more about economic development and using the same presentation. But the goal is really to provide some basis for discussions around the University of Pikeville and Pikeville community. So I want to start kind of level setting around, and this is my opinion. I didn't even go to Wikipedia to define this. Entrepreneurs to me are very strong-headed individuals. They're people who are going to go through brick walls. They're going to do everything they can to launch their company. They want to change the world. They're awesome people to work with. They're not that coachable. So there's a downside to it. For me as a startup specialist and what we do at the University of Michigan, working with entrepreneurs, they are not necessarily open to advice from other people. So it's an interesting dynamic, and they're really valuable, important part of our ecosystem, but not necessarily the sweet spot for me in startups. They have potential for huge value to the community. And you can all think of it, Google, any one of the large companies that have launched, going back to Ford Motor Company. I mean, those are real entrepreneurs that have changed the way things are done. So huge impact, big upside for those. Usually takes a long time to get there. The other thing that's great about entrepreneurship is that it's the new black, right? I mean, it's the very fashionable to be an entrepreneur, and so you can attract a lot of attention to the programs that you have by saying, we're going to do an entrepreneurship program. We have a Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan. We use entrepreneurship at the university to recruit not only students, but also faculty. Faculty who are doing research at another university, we'll let them know that we have programs in place that will allow them to start up a company. To know more about what it means to commercialize technology. That's something that is above and beyond the pure academic sense. So there's lots of positive aspects to entrepreneurship and what that means. For me, and you'll start to see the optic that I come through on this whole thing, is that I want to move startup companies as fast from point A to point B as we can possibly do that. So all the programs that I have associated with that at the University of Michigan are trying to bring this in, especially around funding and around talent. So the talent and treasure aspects of that are really important to what we do for moving startups forward. And if you think about it, I'm launching a company and I need to raise some money to launch my company. Am I more concerned about hiring people, or am I more concerned about getting my company launched? And it's not about job growth, it's about moving the company forward. Startups are great to work with because they are solving existing problems or improving solutions for existing problems typically. They've got their own customer base, they've got great commercial input. So it's not like you have to say the customer will know what they need when I show it to them, which is the entrepreneur's perspective. It's we're going to improve the way this is being done today, or we're going to change it so that it's more efficient. So faster, better, cheaper type of solutions around startups. Usually have solid job growth. So again, from an economic development perspective, it's probably very predictable as to when you're going to add jobs, but it's not the primary focus. And have a higher potential for success. There's not a lot of risk associated with the technology if it's already being proven. Then the third aspect, which reflects my first job about 6 years ago in this space, is around economic development. And in economic development, there's three facets to it. There's the attraction, the expansion, and the retention of jobs, and of companies. What we do in startups, again, very different, is creation of new jobs, but more in the expansion side. Highly localized, and we'll talk about this when it comes to funding. You want every penny to stay in the region when it comes to economic development. The focus is very, very narrow, whether it's a state or federal or a city. You want that money to stay right in that area. So because of that, or one of the aspects of that, is 4,000 jobs coming to the community is huge, and that's what economic development is, trying to do, is bring in those big jobs. If I'm starting a company, it might be 1 job, 2 jobs. I'm not going to get a lot of press. And so one of the aspects of that is people don't see a lot of interesting new startups. Coffee shop opens up, might have a grand opening, but the reality is that's not 2,200 jobs coming into the region. But for that one person, they are now 100% employed. And that's my optic, right, is more on the startup side. So that's kind of the view that I have. It's arguable, I understand. And in your classes, you probably will get the right answer, but this is the perspective that I have on that. The metrics for everything are job creation, putting funding to work, new company formation, patents filed, intellectual property. So that's the world that we live in. Are you creating new value for the community? All right, so now I want to talk about what in the investment community is called either the J curve or the valley of death. And so this is the funding strategy for a technology company, a physical sciences company. If you think about a life sciences company, you're putting tens of millions of dollars to work, and it steps down. You never get that upswing until you are acquired. And so my background is on the physical sciences, but now I'm responsible for life sciences as well. And so we're working with therapeutics, we're working with medical devices, we've got FDA compliance, we've got 7-year windows where we're taking an idea, patenting it, putting it into clinical trials, getting it into human tests, and there's lots of things that go in that. It's billions of dollars that go into new drugs. And so it's not this really cool little J curve. It's a step down until you get acquired by some big pharma. But the columns are the same. And if you look from left to right, what you'll see, and I can see it, I think. So on the far left, even before that is the ideation phase, right? So we actually start working with faculty on their ideas. We try to understand, how does that apply? So it's a startup company or it's an entrepreneur. They've got a new technology. How do we ensure that this technology is something that somebody's going to buy? We look out to the region. We look out to the community. We get on the phone. We talk to big pharma. We talk to Boeing. We talk to Ford Motor Company. We talk to whomever we know and say, this is a technology that will work if it looks like X. We need to do that at the very early stage. Now, there's some tools that the university is looking at, like ICOR, that Dr. Snow's looking at. There's some really cool tools that can help you do that customer discovery at a very early stage, but it's imperative that you do, because if you don't, what you'll do is you create this really, really cool technology that no one will ever buy, or really cool technology that people want, but the cost of manufacturing is so incredibly high that nobody can afford it. That has to happen at an early stage. So if you look at the columns that we have along the funding J-curve, what the black line is representing is that you're selling equity, you are taking on debt with the company, and you don't have customers to replenish that. So you're just in the investigation phase, and there are pools of money that are appropriate for that. Let me go to the extreme. If we have faculty that have an idea and they have a eureka moment in their lab and they say, I'm going to go to California, I'm going to get $10 million, and I'm going to launch this company. That's probably the worst thing that could happen for me as the director of the Venture Center, because they've got, the venture capitalist is going to take the meeting, and they're going to talk with them, and they're going to be excited, and they're going to think they're going to get the money. And really, the venture capitalists, they're great people, they're wonderful people, but they're being educated by these really smart individuals about those specific tasks, those new technologies. They're not really interested in making an investment. If you look at E, in the growth phase, that's really where venture capitalists get involved, right? Angels, friends and family, grant money, as long as you can stay. What we try to do at the University of Michigan, and most tech transfer offices do this, we try to keep the technology under the safety of the umbrella of the university for as long as possible, because you've got non-dilutive funding, you're not selling equity, you're not taking on debt, and you're continuing to grow the technology. National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, you've got lots of different organizations that will give you free money, and what they're looking for is that you publish, that you share the idea with someone, and our office helps you protect that intellectual property. So, friends and family, crowdfunding. How many of you have heard of crowdfunding? So crowdfunding is really, really cool for technologies that are student-run technologies, mobile apps, new devices. The reason that it's really cool is what you're doing with crowdfunding is you're not only raising money so that you can advance your technology, but you're also getting customer input on that, right? And so there's some really cool success stories out there on crowdfunding. On Kickstarter, there was a guy who wanted to create a nano watch. So he wanted to take his iPod Nano, make it into a watch. He didn't even have the molds to create that technology yet. And so he did a Kickstarter campaign, wanted to raise $90,000, I think is what he wanted to raise, so that he could make these nano watches and start to sell them. So he's creating this company around it. And so in crowdfunding, the aspects of crowdfunding are unique. You need to have a really great video, and you need to have a nice executive summary. And then the third aspect of that is, what do you give in exchange for that? And what he gave in exchange for that was, if you pre-ordered the technology through crowdfunding, you would get a nano watch. So $50. MSRP is going to be $100. You pay for it now. We'll give it to you for $50 when I make it. If you gave him $200, he'd give you one nano watch, but he'd autograph it. Or if you give him $500, he'd let you put your name on it and customize it and have limited distribution of that one. So he came up with different things that he'd give in exchange for the money for the nano watch. He raised over $1 million online. And there's other examples of that where they're raising tens of millions of dollars using crowdfunding. So because this is business class, I'll spend a little more time on this. There's some very interesting SEC regulations that go along with that. So FinReg D, which means that you can only have investment from accredited investors, is imperative that you don't sell equity. So what's great about Kickstarter as it is now, and there's others, there's Kiva, Kickstarter, lots of different crowdfunding mechanisms. What's great about them right now is that it's really just pre-sale of product and service. So if you stick with that, you're good. If you start selling equity, you're going to jail. I mean, it's just that simple. They haven't been able to pass the Jobs Act yet with respect to this one part. And so if you raise money and you sell stock in your company, it's it's a solicitation for sale of the company, which is illegal right now under Financial 501 Reg D. And the SEC 501 Reg D. So you've got to be really careful with it, but if what you're doing is just pre-selling product and service, you're good. You're golden, it's awesome, great way to get customer input, investigation phase. So in the state of Michigan, we also have things called smart zones. In fact, when I was in Detroit, and we'll talk about this a little bit, when I was in Detroit, I recognized 60 different funding mechanisms just in the city of Detroit, right? Now, there was the Hebrew Free Loan Fund, there was the African American funds, there were different funds that were specific to different demographics. There was a women's angel fund. And so you looked at all of the different things that were there. There's still 60 different ways to raise money at these early stages in the city of Detroit. That was helpful, but it also is something that nobody knew about. And so as you guys go out and you look at launching a company, one of the things that's important is that you don't try to figure that out on your own. There's people like me in every community that have gone out and have helped raise money. And so I would, find that person, and probably here at the university, and identify what's the right use of funds at the right time. So that's key. That's something that I spent a lot of time on when I was in Detroit, focused on that. So we're going to spend more time on this than I will this afternoon, but I think that based on what your focus is, this is kind of cool and important to what your classes are. All right, so angels are high net worth individuals. Obviously, you know about that. Those are people who will write a check for $250,000 in exchange for 10 to 20%. If you've seen Shark Tank, you've seen angels. The bad thing about Shark Tank's results is that people have really, their expectations are kind of out of line with what I see as an angel investor. A lot of times angels want nothing to do with the day-to-day operations. They've retired. The last thing they want to do is go sit on top of a board and make the day-to-day decisions. So they want to put their money to work, and what they'll do is they'll say, I'll make an investment of $250,000, here's $10,000. Prove to me that you can do it and I'll give you another $10,000. So they've got milestones in place that'll do that. That's a great way to vet the management team and the technology on the way through. Grants, again, we actually have grants all the way at the very beginning, even at the ideation stage through NSF, like I said, government agencies. What these grants are talking about are SBIRs. So through the SBA, there's Small Business Innovation Research Grants, and STTRs, Small Business Translational Research, which are specifically for a startup company. So if you have a startup company that is doing translational research, SBIR is a great way to go because it's federal money that is non-dilutive, again, will help you grow the company and get your technology in line, your customers identified. All right, so now we get into venture capital. This is the stuff you read about. This is the stuff that is, the $10 million, it makes the front page, right? Which is a shame. A company raises $10 million and they make the front page. Somebody who raises $200,000 and launches a company with 3 employees, nobody ever reads about. And that's a problem for us in the community, in any community, because there's no difference in the level of effort, and there's probably more impact on the smaller amount of money in moving the needle on that technology. And then as you move past venture capital, and they're making Series A rounds, and again, they're making $1 million investment, $10 million, $30 million investment for percentages of the company. And then the equity, the private equity, are the mergers and acquisitions aspect of that. So this is my world. This is what I've lived in. I've lived in the valley of death for the last 6 years, and I've become very comfortable in that. You need to find somebody like me if you're starting a company, because there's ways to go about this that make a lot of sense, and there's ways to go about it that don't make a lot of sense. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick flyover of my experience in the last 3 jobs I've had, which unfortunately has only been the last 6 years. I wish the last 3 jobs I had was the last 20 years, but my mom wishes that were the case too. But you reinvent yourself. I found my calling in doing what I do right now. And I found that in Battle Creek when I went to work for these guys. Economic development, I know now that I don't want to do economic development, that my forte is in startups. But primarily, everybody's heard of Kellogg's, probably heard of Battle Creek because it's on the side of the cereal box, and when you're trying to let the coffee kick in, you read the side of the box for some reason, and it says Battle Creek, Michigan on the side. Lots of food industry knowledge in Battle Creek, Michigan. We also had a community college there. They have a community college there. Kellogg Foundation, $8 billion foundation. The Department of Defense, every single item that's ordered by the Department of Defense goes through an order processing system in Battle Creek, Michigan. We also had the 110th Air Wing with all the A-10s with the 50 caliber machine guns on the front. I mean, just really, really cool place to hang out for somebody like me. All right, so I got hired to start a technology business accelerator. The business accelerator's focus was to create jobs and diversify the economy. The MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, gave us $250,000 for 2 years to launch this. I looked around and having an MBA, I said, okay, what's my competitive differentiator? We've got Kalamazoo, we've got Grand Rapids, they're doing life sciences. They want me to do something unique, something to diversify the economy, and realized that I didn't really want to compete with people who've already been doing this for a long time and have tens of millions of dollars behind them. We also had strengths in food processing, like I talked about, the 110th Air Wing, as well as defense services. And we had a direct investment fund. I'll come back to that in a minute. So went through the process, and when I was there and was saying, I'm doing technology business acceleration, but I didn't say what it was I was doing, we only had 12 companies that I was working with. And so one of the takeaways I'll leave with you is as you do this as an economic developer, if you claim a domain, it makes a big difference, because what we did is we said, we're going to get into food safety. We're going to get into food protection and technologies around that. And when we said that, we went from 12 companies to 100 companies in just 6 months. And very few of those had anything to do with food safety or food protection. So it was interesting, but people go, oh, you know what you're doing? Well, I've got a mobile app. Can you help me with this? You know what you're doing in this space. Can you help me? It's a different widget. And so it was an interesting thing for me to understand. 110th Air Wing, stuff that I had nothing to do with. They converted to cybersecurity, and I believe every one of the drones that are flown in North Africa are flown from Battle Creek, Michigan. Kind of an interesting thing. We also identified different resources. What we'll spend more time talking about this afternoon is the 16 different entrepreneurial support programs that were identified in Calhoun County. Very interesting dilemma. I forgot to take this part out that I put in parentheses. So I'm in a town. My family's 2 hours away, so I'm staying in Battle Creek Monday through Thursday. And I wanted to know the community. And so what I did was I went to a different restaurant all the time. What I found was, and I think the interesting takeaway was, there's some awesome entrepreneurs in the restaurant and food service business. You know, coffee shop owners, those people have it in their core to be entrepreneurs. And so I had developed some really interesting relationships. And by the way, they became mentors for me in the programs that we were working on. Even though they were running a coffee shop, they were really good at understanding spreadsheets, and they were good at, a new entrepreneur who didn't know how to read a pro forma. They were helpful there. So just a side note. We developed a score sheet, which I'll show you in a second. And this is key to vetting deals. And the community developed a Global Food Protection Institute to accelerate entrepreneurship, as well as the Center for Entrepreneurship itself. All right. This is the score sheet, and you can't read it, I'm sure. But what this is it's something that we started in Battle Creek, and I've taken it with me on the last 3 jobs. What this is it's defining risk and value for any project that I work on. The reason I did this was, remember, I went from 12 projects to 100. And I'm sitting in my office one day, and somebody comes in and they say, I'm going to call Congressman Smith. I'm calling Congressman Smith because you won't help me with my project, and you're helping Mr. Jones on that. And I said, well, I asked you to write a business plan for me. You haven't done that. Well, yeah, but neither has the other guy. And so I realized that I needed to have some way of measuring the value of these companies. Defensively, I needed to figure out a way to do it so that I could point to it and say, this is why we're doing it this way. This is why your project is not being promoted. And so I know it's like scoring gymnastics. I mean, it's very subjective, but it's me scoring every one of them so I can show why I gave somebody a 10 and somebody else an 8. So what the values are in this thing are important, and you'll get this as the PowerPoint that I leave behind. The first is intellectual property. Not everybody has IP. The second one is the market, right? So we've got the market, then we've got the management team, then is it a point solution, is it a platform technology? So we're going through what are all the values associated with this company, and we score that. And then we have the risks, and the risks are the founder. Is the founder going to stick around? Are they going to be able to perform? The phase of the technology, is it early? Are people actually using it? So we create a metric for both the risk and the value. And then I did some weird math because I didn't want people to really know what it meant. So when you get a really high score from me, it's 0.0028. And so people don't argue with me because I don't want to be giving A, Bs, and Cs, because then I become a professor and you argue with me about your grade, right? So 0.0028 means nothing to you other than when I show you later, we've got a relative chart which shows you the strength, and you can see the difference. Anyway. All right, so Battle Creek, grant runs out. They don't pay me anymore. I'm done working for them. Actually, I found an opportunity in between Battle Creek and Detroit where I became the vice president of commercialization for a private organization. Dream job, going to make a ton of money launching technologies. We raised $5 million for a technology, and I was going to continue to accelerate the growth of other intellectual property. The venture capitalist walked into my office and said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I take all this cool technology and I commercialize it." And they say, "No, you don't, because we just bought it all." And so I was only there about 9 months. So then I went to Detroit. And you can see now why my mom wished that I had a more consistent resume. But obviously you know the Detroit story, auto industry heavily impacted by the Great Recession, high unemployment. They launched TechTown with Kauffman Foundation money. There was a place called the New Economy Initiative, which was a bunch of grants up to $100 million. The Detroit City Fund, which again was funding for specific jobs in the city of Detroit, and the First Step Fund. So I'm going to gloss over some of these things. The goals, originally in collaboration with Wayne State University, we were going to be the tech transfer office for all the startups. And we were going to provide soft landing for those outside as well as tech transfer for the university. The vision was to create a massive amount of entrepreneurs. Before I got there, there were 1,300 people in the program, 1,300 entrepreneurs going through the program, and I think it was 2010. Just a crazy amount of people that were going through the fast track training. And then my role there was the entrepreneurial capital champion. My job was to know the J-curve, the valley of death, and know it really, really well. So the process we went through, we looked at all the assets we had. We had BizDemU. Dan Gilbert had a ton of money in from Quicken Loans, created different programs. We had the tech transfer office from Wayne State. Initially, we had 400 companies. But what we found was that those people were there only because we were actually providing them meals. That was the only reason that they were there. So we started charging $5 for their lunch, and it went down to like 10. I mean, it literally was that dramatic of a change. Again, using the score sheet to show people that there's a difference, there's a reason that we're going to work with some companies and not other companies. And then, as I mentioned, Fast Track was a massive training tool for all of those programs. All right, so the results were, and this is more economic development. We'll spend time, again, later this afternoon, but we needed to differentiate. We really didn't differentiate in what we did with the other programs that were there. The huge success was place-based entrepreneurship. That is the solopreneur, the guy or the gal who was going to focus on their coffee shop or their janitorial supply business. Great successes, growing a lot of companies that way. We had a Thrive One fund, which was about $400,000 from the city of Detroit. And one of the things we did with that was we said that you were required to get somebody to co-sign with you, not for the collateral, but because we wanted them to become your mentor. So we tried to expand that for them. And we lost the home office for the First Step Fund. And what you'll find with funding is that If you manage the home office, then you manage the center of gravity for that fund. And that center of gravity went to Ann Arbor, where I ended up eventually. But what happened was our deal flow through that fund went to just about nothing. All right, so now I'm at the University of Michigan, and there's 19 schools and colleges at the University of Michigan. And so at the Tech Transfer Office, we need to be very nimble with what we look at. Life sciences, physical sciences, have a conversation with, literally, we've got a way to capture nerve signals for a robotic arm so that Star Wars hand is a reality, probably in the next 5 years. Really cool stuff there. And then radiation detection, where I can put a device here and I can tell if somebody had medical treatment, or I can tell if somebody has a dirty bomb, and it'll pinpoint you on a fisheye lens camera who it is. So really cool technologies being installed and implemented today. But the diversity in that is a bit of a problem when it comes to mobilizing the startups. In our fiscal year, which ended in July, we had 421 invention reports. We had over 100 agreements. I think we did over $14 million in revenue in from patents in the past. We had 9 new startups, and our research budget, $1.3 billion. I mean, it's amazing. It's a machine when it comes to technology. Again, my focus very narrowly at the Venture Center is to launch new companies. And what we're looking for in new companies is we're looking for management, market, and money. So if you have 2 of those 3 qualifications, then my recommendation is to the licensing team that you would be qualified to license that technology. All right, so this is the process that we go through. And I'm not expecting you to be able to see this either, but what is important is that if you look at Fast Track, if you look at I-Core, if you look at training programs, they talk about each one of these different aspects of growing a company. I don't care about that part, and it might sound a little bad for me to say that, because I'm part of a university, I'm not that interested in the education aspect. It's not my job. I get paid for launching startup companies. So our focus is to take you from point A to point B as quickly as possible. So if we can skip a step, we'll do that. Typically we can't. Typically every company goes through this, but we're customized to that technology and to that management team. If you've got an outside management team with a lot of industry experience, we probably are closer to a customer, and so I'm not as worried about the management team with that one as if I've got faculty who aren't interested in leaving their company, right? So every one of these are managed uniquely. We use 3 tools to do that: technology roadmap, business formation strategy, and a funding strategy. The funding strategy is based significantly on that valley of death J-curve. The technology roadmap is the way that funding strategy is informed, right? So if I'm developing a mobile app, and you can launch a company on a mobile app for $10,000, right? So you get somebody to cobble it together for you, wireframe it for $2,500. That's one step. I can find $2,500 for you. I can't find $1 million. I can find $2,500. So we move through that funding strategy along with the technology roadmap, and then we backfill that with the business formation strategy. Will you need venture capital? If so, you need a seasoned team around that. So we do all of this. I also have, not only do I have the Mentors in Residence program, where we've got 7 guys who've launched and sold companies in the past. Incredibly valuable resource. I have a business formation team for life sciences as well as physical sciences. These guys are the specialists who will sit there and drive these different strategies. And then I've got a venture accelerator, which is a 2,500 square foot wet lab space. It's a dream place to be. So you've got the hoods, you've got the labs. I mean, it's a really cool place. And we got it because Pfizer left Michigan. Pfizer just abandoned the state of Michigan, and we had all of this property. And so the state of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and the university came together, and part of it is assigned to the Venture Accelerator. So that's where some of our life sciences companies are. All right, so I told you that we had a chart for all of the scoring that we did for those startup companies, and that's on the right-hand side. And this is actually what I use. And you can see some companies are pitching up nicely, some are pitching down, some are flatlining. And so what I do on a monthly basis is I look at each one of these different projects and I allocate resources appropriately. I'm not going to give you $10,000 if you're not interested in meeting with me, right? I'm not going to help you find $10,000 to get your mobile app developed if you're not going to talk with us. So that's how your score will change. If the management doesn't meet with us for 3 or 4 months, they're going to start to pitch down. So again, as subjective as gymnastics, but important to see the relative strength to each one of these. And eventually this will become a venture readiness level, or VRL, for the program. Right now it's just a comparative strength scoring. So, and then fiscal year to date, so end of December, we've launched 7 companies, so we're on track to make the 10. I committed to my boss 8 because I have 6 months to get 1 more, but he wants me to get 10. Actually, he wants me to get 38, and we don't care at the end of the day. We want to make sure that these are venture-ready companies as we launch them. Management, market, money, right? So one of the interesting things that we're working on is prying open the door to the university's technology and the assets that we have. How do we help accelerate the growth of these companies? How do we work with the engineering program? How do we work with the medical school to move it forward? All right, so in summary, right, because I want to give you guys a chance to Q&A, so this is your time to start thinking about that. So the summary of this is that I don't believe that entrepreneurs are the same as startups, and this is not a genius comment by me. One of my mentors when I was in Battle Creek said, we keep talking about entrepreneurship, but aren't we really just trying to create companies that are sustainable companies? And that's a different thing. An entrepreneur is going to start something and maybe go off and do something else. A startup is not going to, as we talked about earlier. So I don't think it's the same thing. Don't dilute efforts in a community level. We'll talk about diluting efforts later. Celebrate failure. One of the things that we don't do enough is when somebody puts it all out there and doesn't make it. And that's a stepping stone. The best way I heard this articulated was I was out in California at a venture capital conference, and somebody asked the question, what's the difference between the Midwest and startups and the West Coast? And the guy said, when you're sitting at a baseball game out in California and your kids are playing baseball, you look down the bench and there's a bunch of people sitting there, and most of them are running their own company or working for a new startup company. So there's a lot of comfort in knowing that if the one you're working on right now fails, you'll have an opportunity to go get a job with one of those other ones. In the Midwest, he said, you go to a game and you sit there and you've got the one guy who is starting up his own company, and everybody asks, when are you going to get a real job? And so the difference is that you need to show that the risk isn't there. As young people, the risk is even less, right? You've got lots of time to recover from a failure, but we need to celebrate that failure as a community. All right, defining a local and regional domain. Where does one organization fit and one not fit? Lockstep training and commingle companies is risky. When we do the training programs, putting a PhD in electrical engineering in with somebody who is just starting a coffee shop, not that there's anything wrong with that, but hugely different parameters in terms of what they're looking for in training. Commingling those slows it down sometimes and creates some challenges in the training program. Talent may be more important than money. And so trying to find out where people hang out, where is the talent, where can you get support for launching these companies is key. Funding, right funding at the right time, really important. Don't go after venture capital money if you don't have revenues. Just not a good idea. Probably not a good idea with angel funding either. Use grant money as much as you can. If you can write a synopsis of what you're looking to do, chances are pretty good that you will at least get an audience within a grant writing agency. Get a seat at the funding table, again, more in the community level. Keynesian beauty contest, when you start to fund your company, it's not about the person you're having invest right now, it's about the person who's going to invest down the road, right? It's not the person who's investing now that's key, it's the next person. So if you put together terms so go to the Shark Tank example, $100,000 for 50% of your company. Crazy, right? If you need to raise $1 million, now you only have 50% because the angel's probably not going to be diluted. So you have to be very careful of what the next person is going to do in terms of funding. Everybody pivots, make milestones based on the technology and how it's advancing. So when you put together your business plans, put together business plans in such a way that the technology roadmap, right, and the funding strategy align, and that you've got points in there where you can pivot. So you would come up with a minimally viable product, which is a product which you can socialize within the industry and show people, this is what I'm thinking about doing, what do you think? Well, if you make it blue instead of fuchsia, I'd buy it. Okay, now I go back, I get funding to make that. But build that pivot into your funding strategy. So in the community, there's, it's important to define your swim lanes, but they're not always well defined. And what I mean by that is, and I'll just personalize it, within the Venture Center, our focus is on startups. Startups. The Center for Entrepreneurship is teaching startups to faculty, but they're really doing it more as an education process. But a lot of times we're bumping heads in the pool because I'm working on the startup and they're telling them something different. If you tell somebody something different about the capitalization of a company than what we will, faculty will get confused, or the founding team will get confused. So that's what that's all about. And then the last thing is that I had the privilege of having Rick Snyder come to our office before he became governor of the state of Michigan, because he was from Battle Creek, and I said, what advice would you give me about what I'm endeavoring to do here? And he said, be patient. This takes a long time. Whether you're starting a company or launching an ecosystem, it takes a long time. Just be patient. Be patient with the plan, it'll work out. And then he said, don't be a lone wolf, because lone wolves get their heads blown off. And what I found immediately after that was the economic development community. I asked them for some support. I said, hey, I don't have any mentors in Battle Creek. I have no idea what to do with this technology. They were incredibly helpful, up to and including just giving me their entire database of stuff and saying, use what you want, return it to me when you're done. That level of collaboration is actually why I'm here today, right? So you probably aren't going to have University of Michigan intellectual property come out of this university. But at the same time, I'm going to learn a lot from you guys over a period of time. So here's the first step in that collaboration. You give and then you give back over time. So I think that's it. I think I've got a couple lists of websites and books that were important to me as I went through this, and that's in the PowerPoint that I left. But would like to open it up to questions. So the question for the recording, the question is, do you use different strategies for urban versus rural areas? And yes and no. There's probably more concentrated funding and talent in an urban area than there is in a rural area. So the strategy around a software startup might be a little easier to see in Detroit than it was in Battle Creek. But what we did in Battle Creek was we just found tools to bring that resource in. So we used a lot of GoToMeeting, did a lot of Skype. We brought talent from, well, actually it made a big difference to us in Battle Creek, because what we did was we started creating a domain of expertise around a certain topic. And I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the global food protection. It's worldwide, because we reached out to China and said, what are you doing around that? So it is different, because you have to use tools to try to bring the resources in that you don't have. Funding is an issue, though. Funding's a big deal. If there's a way to find a fund, to create a fund, as small as it can be, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be $1 billion private equity fund. A few $100,000 go a long way to getting you a lot of traction on getting projects going. Who's next? Yes.
Detroit filed bankruptcy.
Right.
What's going on with that, and are they going to be able to rebound? What's your answers for that?
Well, I'm really glad I'm not in economic development. So the question was that Detroit filed for bankruptcy and what's going on there. I know that it's still being fought. I know that the big deal there, and probably the most important aspect to that, is this is going to set precedents for other pensions around the country. So a lot of other cities that are in jeopardy are looking at the city of Detroit to see what happens. Because if we can say we're not paying pensions in the city of Detroit, then it's going to hurt a lot of people. But there'll probably be a lot of cities to follow that they also can't pay their bills on that. I don't know. I know the governor's in favor of trying to resolve that filing and moving on, and it's something that had to be done. I think that, you know, as much trouble as it might get me in a public forum like this, you know, we just, if you don't have the money, you can't buy the new bike. I mean, it's this, you know, and trust me, I want to buy a new bike right now, so it hits home for me. Yes?
Could you talk about how business plans have evolved recently?
Yeah, good point. 5 years ago, we had business plan competitions all the time. There were great business plan competitions, and they're a very valuable part of the ecosystem, and it's an important aspect of what you would do with respect to, I hope my answer on Detroit didn't scare her away. It's an important aspect of doing real honest-to-goodness fundraising, and the business plan, though, is morphed somewhat to a business model canvas, which is being promoted by Steve Blank and the I-Corps program. What's interesting is that it's harder to write the business model canvas than it is to write the business plan. The business model canvas is one sheet of paper. It talks about your target markets, it talks about your management team, it talks about your risks, it talks about what your minimally viable product will be, and it maps it out on one piece of paper that really is this big, you know, when you actually put it all together. All that is a summary of what your business plan is, right? But business plans have changed a lot. I know very few venture capitalists will ask for a business plan. Now they're looking for an investor pitch deck, and, you know, just show me what your product does. And in fact, in the programs we run, we want 6 bullets. What do you do? What problem do you solve? What makes you unique? What do you need? What do you need it for? And what are the risks? That's pretty much an investor pitch deck. But business plans are changing a lot, and I think a lot of it has to do with the lean startup and speed of execution around that. Next question. I'm here till 3, so. Yes. What's one of the technologies that what? That actually is very much like asking me which of my children I like the most. And I like my son better than my daughter, for what it's worth. I'm just kidding. So we've had home runs where we've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars back to the university for the sale of flu mist. That was technology out of the university. So there are several of those. We've been doing this for about 15 years, and we have 100 companies in our portfolio that are at different stages of exit, right? So some have done an IPO, some have launched. I'll tell you, my favorite though is the radiation detection, because it's a group of PhD students and their advisor who started this company. And they got $3 million of grant money from DITRA, which is part of the Department of Defense. And making sure I'm not saying anything proprietary. The technology uses some special capabilities which allows you to identify not only that there is radiation in the room, but what type of radiation. And right now, the technologies that are being used, if you go through the border and go between Windsor and Detroit, radiation detectors go off all the time because somebody had radiation therapy done the week before. And cat litter sets off radiation detectors at the border. And there have been freighters that have been held offshore because the radiation detection thing has just gone red, and they're full of cat litter, right? So there's radiation in cement. The problem is differentiating between bad radiation and just normal everyday radiation. And this technology helps do that. So the thing I like about it is I've pushed really hard that these guys take venture capital money. I really wanted them to take venture capital money, and they held off. And I was at their open house on Monday, and they're on target to be 7 figures this next 6 months in selling units to nuclear power plants. And so, I mean, it's a great story. They went through our very similar program to what you're going through, is a business plan writing through the business school. There's 3 PhD students and the advisor, 100% ownership of the company, except for the university has 3% or 4%, whatever it works out to, as part of the tech transfer. We take a little piece of the action. But I mean, that's one of my favorites because probably because they didn't listen to me and they were successful. And maybe less people should listen to me, or more people should not listen to me.
Any surprises on ones that you thought would make it?
Yeah, there's digital projects move very, very quickly. And so if you look at mobile apps or web-based applications, those move very quickly through the startup process. And we have a couple technologies that I think are really cool, and they're things that I could use. They're online behavioral health type of technologies where it's a real gap within the space right now. I mean, you can track your nutrition, you can track your sleep, you can track your exercise, but it's really tough to track your moods, right? And so there was a really cool technology out of the university that was around that, and we just can't get the model right. And it surprises me that we can't get the model right around that. Others that are shocking are technologies that literally would save lives tomorrow. Again, trying to be very careful that I don't talk about proprietary technology. We have a technology that is eye drops that cures cataracts, dissolves them. $1 a bottle. We can't license it because right now it's $2,500 for technology to go through or for people to get their eyes operated on, and so the industry's resistant before we even get there. Right now, whether or not the technology gets past clinical phases and it actually works, it doesn't matter because it's a non-starter. We can't get Big Pharma to look at that and move it past the beginning. So that's probably the biggest surprise. Again, we have thousands of cures for cancer. Whether they really are or not takes a long time to tell. What else? What's the cool technology you guys are looking at? Web-based, mobile apps, online? Sinking in your chair. Yeah.
What's like your average time, I guess, as far as like getting a startup going?
So in therapeutic, we're looking at 7 to 10 years. So drugs to market, 7 to 10 years. And so what we're trying to do with the digital projects is make sure that they are no less than 6 to 12 months. Because if you think about it, I mean, we can all be working on the same mobile app at the same time. If I get to market before you do, there is a first mover advantage on some of that. And so we want to ensure that we're providing the appropriate level to get it out faster. And so the the important part of that is, if you look at our tech transfer office, we are quite well defined based on our life sciences history. So we've got the therapeutic stuff figured out. That's where we came from. We can't use those same tools to move a technology from ideation to commercialization if it's a mobile app. So we're changing that. That was more of an answer than you wanted, but we're looking at 6 to 12 months on digital technology and 7 to 10 years on therapeutics. It's a big spectrum. Yeah.
Just an off-the-wall thought, but for your cataract solution, the surgery for eye surgery, radiokeratomy, was developed in Russia. Two, we have here a company that produces mining machinery, and they're experienced with export sales. They have an office in China, one in Ukraine, so on. That as far as intellectual property, the Russians do honor their contracts. This is a kind of development that might well be something that needs to be tested in the second world, and maybe not quite ready for first world yet. So it's just a thought I'd throw out for them to consider.
It's a great point, and actually that's where they're taking the technology is to China right now, because where people have cataracts, they can't afford the $2,500 surgery, or $1,200, whatever it is.
The Chinese won't pay, but the Russians will.
So, and I've done nothing in Russia. So, a great point. And then the other thing, as you said, the IP is probably better protected in Russia than it would be in China, for sure. We actually have a kind of a rip-off strategy with China that we just plan on them stealing technology from us, and so we partner with somebody, try to establish a 3 to 5 year run rate with them, and then plan on after 5 years they're going to have figured out a way around the patent or just absolutely pulled it through, and we're okay with that as long as we build that into the model and the investors know that that's the case as well. We're okay, except for from a legal perspective. Anything else?
Jack, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's give him a round of applause. And Jack will be available for a few moments after this program if you'd like to stay and speak with him. Also, I would like to remind the students there's a sign-up sheet in the back if you have not signed up for your attendance today. And also, as we close, I would like to remind you that at 11:45 he will continue this program in the cafeteria with lunch. And I would certainly like to thank Jordan Gibson and Dr. Eric Becker for facilitating this event and being very gracious to help the College of Business. So Jordan and Dr. Becker, thank you very much. All right, we conclude.